Trust doesn't die in one moment. It bleeds out slowly, drop by drop through 1,000 small cuts you convince yourself are accidents. Mine ended when I found a second phone hidden inside a tampon box, because apparently my wife thought I'd never look there. She was almost right. 12 years of marriage, 2 kids, a mortgage in Phoenix that felt like a life sentence, all unraveled because I needed ibuprofen for a headache that wouldn't quit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The phone wasn't hers. At least it wasn't the one I knew about. This one had a different case, a different carrier, and when I powered it on while standing in our master bathroom at 2 in the morning, it had a different name entirely. The contact list was short but telling: Marcus, real estate; Tony, logistics; David, consulting. And one entry that made my stomach drop through the floor: hotel preferences, with a note that read, always book adjoining rooms when possible. I'm Robert, and I'm about to tell you how business trips became bedroom trips, how a migraine led to evidence, and why sometimes the truth is hiding in the last place you'd think to look. If you believe marriages fall apart because people stop talking, you're only half right. Sometimes they fall apart because people start talking to the wrong person. Before everything cracked open like an egg hitting concrete, our life looked like something from a mortgage company brochure. I managed regional distribution for an industrial parts supplier, the kind of job that pays well enough to afford a 4-bedroom house in Scottsdale, and poorly enough that you notice when gas prices jump. Sarah handled procurement for a mid-size construction firm, which meant she traveled to job sites, vendor meetings, and trade shows about once a month. We had routines that felt like anchors. Sunday pancakes with the kids, Emma who's 8 and thinks syrup is a food group, and Jake who's 11 and believes everything can be fixed with duct tape. Tuesday nights were my turn to handle homework while Sarah caught up on invoices. Friday evenings meant takeout Chinese and a movie none of us could agree on, so we'd end up watching something animated that made Jake roll his eyes and Emma clap her hands. Our kitchen calendar looked like a game of Tetris. Soccer practice, piano lessons, parent-teacher conferences, Sarah's travel dates circled in red ink. I kept track of her trips the way other husbands track fantasy football. Departure times, return flights, hotel confirmations forwarded to my email so I'd know where to reach her. It felt responsible, organized, the kind of partnership our parents' generation would have called modern. I wasn't the jealous type, never had been. In college I'd watched friends destroy perfectly good relationships by reading too much into late texts and friendly hugs. When I met Sarah at a conference in Denver 7 years ago, I decided to be the kind of man who trusts first and investigates never. She was presenting on supply chain optimization while I was learning about inventory management, and when she laughed at my joke about spreadsheets during the coffee break, I knew I wanted to be around that laugh for the rest of my life. Trust became my default setting. When she worked late, I made dinner for the kids and saved her a plate. When her phone buzzed during family time, I didn't peek over her shoulder. When she mentioned new colleagues or client dinners, I asked polite questions and believed the answers. I figured trust was like a muscle. Use it or lose it. I used it every day for 12 years. Sarah was the kind of woman who made parenting look effortless. She could pack a school lunch, coordinate a carpool, and prep for a presentation while I was still trying to find matching socks for Jake. PTA meetings, neighborhood barbecues, Emma's dance recitals where she forgot half the choreography but smiled like she'd nailed it. Sarah showed up with homemade cookies and remembered everyone's names. She had that rare quality of making people feel seen without trying too hard. At home she was the one who noticed when Jake needed new cleats before I did, who remembered that Emma was nervous about the spelling bee, who could mediate sibling fights with the diplomatic skills of a UN negotiator. She kept fresh flowers on the dining room table, not because we were fancy people, but because she said it made the house feel intentional. Sunday mornings, she'd make coffee strong enough to wake the dead and read the news aloud while I scrambled eggs and pretended to understand international politics. I loved watching her get ready for work trips. The methodical way she packed, rolling clothes instead of folding them, keeping chargers in the same pocket every time. She'd lay out her outfits the night before, checking weather reports for cities I'd never visited. Business casual for client meetings, something nicer for dinner presentations. She'd kiss me goodbye at 5 in the morning, whisper that she'd text when she landed, and promise to bring the kids something interesting from whatever city was paying her bills that week. The kids were my anchor points. Emma with her gap-toothed grin and her collection of stuffed animals that each had elaborate backstories. Jake with his quiet intensity and his ability to build functional robots out of cereal boxes and old electronics. They were the reason I learned patience, the reason I stopped seeing problems as permanent fixtures. When Jake struggled with math, we'd work through problems at the kitchen table until they clicked. When Emma had nightmares, I'd sit on the edge of her bed and make up stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. Being a father taught me that love isn't a feeling you fall into. It's a choice you make every morning when you hear small feet hitting the hardwood floor. It's checking homework you don't understand, explaining why fairness matters even when it's inconvenient, and modeling the kind of person you hope they'll become. Every decision I made, I measured against their faces. Every line I drew with their future in mind. Phoenix in October feels like the city's apology for summer. The heat backs down from brutal to merely aggressive, and you can walk to the mailbox without feeling like you're being punished for something. Our neighborhood was the kind of place where people knew each other's dogs' names and borrowed lawn mowers without asking. Halloween decorations went up the day after Labor Day, and Christmas lights stayed up until Valentine's Day because nobody had the energy to take them down. I knew the cashiers at the grocery store, the mechanics at the oil change place, and which barista at the coffee shop near my office spelled my name right on the cup. My commute was 22 minutes of talk radio and podcasts about things I'd never use but found interesting anyway. Weekend projects included fixing the sprinkler system that never quite worked right and painting the back fence that the desert sun kept bleaching white. We belonged to the middle class that keeps the economy running.
Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The people who comparison shop for insurance buy store brand cereal and know exactly when every subscription service charges their credit card. Stability dressed up like routine, and routine felt like security. We had emergency funds, retirement accounts, and college savings plans that grew slowly but steadily. We weren't rich, but we were solid. Solid felt like enough. Sarah's job required travel, which was how she'd explained it when we first got serious. Site visits to construction projects, vendor negotiations that worked better face-to-face, industry conferences that kept her current on trends and regulations. She'd show me her itineraries, forward confirmation emails, and call every night when she was on the road. The kids got postcards from places like Boise and Sacramento, cities that weren't glamorous but were real enough to prove she'd been there. At first, the travel felt manageable, even exciting. She'd text photos of hotel lobbies and room service menus, complain about rental cars that smelled like cigarettes, and bring home branded coffee mugs and pens that the kids fought over. I handled solo parenting duty like a temporary assignment. Dinner got simpler, bedtime routines got looser, but we managed. The kids learned to video call mommy before homework, and I learned to braid Emma's hair well enough that she wouldn't get teased at school. The trips became more frequent as her company grew. What started as once a month became twice a month, then sometimes 3 times. Bigger projects, more responsibility, clients who specifically requested her because she'd built a reputation for getting things done. She'd apologize for the increased schedule, promise it wouldn't last forever, and remind me that the overtime pay was funding Jake's summer baseball camp and Emma's art classes. I supported it because supporting your spouse's career is what good husbands do. When she got promoted to senior procurement specialist, I took her out to dinners at the expensive steakhouse downtown. When she landed the Morrison account that required monthly trips to Las Vegas, I helped her shop for business clothes that would photograph well in client meetings. When she mentioned that some projects required longer stays, extending 2-day trips to 4 or 5 days, I adjusted my own schedule to cover school pickup and doctor appointments. Trust lived in the small choices I made every day. When her phone rang during dinner, I'd answer it if she was busy with the kids. When she came home tired from difficult clients, I'd run her a bath and handle bedtime stories. When friends made jokes about business trips and hotel bars, I'd change the subject because our marriage wasn't a punchline. I chose to believe in the woman I'd married, the mother of my children, the person who'd promised to choose me every day for the rest of our lives. But trust is fragile in ways you don't realize until it's already cracked. It's built on patterns, on expectations that get met consistently over time. When those patterns shift, trust starts asking questions it never had to ask before. Why does she need 2 showers when she gets home from a 3-day trip? Why does she book her own flights now instead of using the company travel agent? Why does she pack clothes I've never seen her wear? I told myself these were normal adjustments. Successful women adapt to professional demands. Experienced travelers develop preferences and shortcuts. I was being supportive, not suspicious. I was trusting my wife, not tracking her movements. I was being the kind of husband who believes in partnership, not the kind who demands surveillance. The night before everything changed was Tuesday, October 15th. Sarah was packing for a 4-day trip to Denver, a follow-up meeting with the Morrison client that she'd described as routine but important. She laid out clothes on the bed while I helped Jake with a science project about solar systems that was due the next morning. Emma was already asleep, curled up with the stuffed elephant Sarah had brought her from Sacramento. We moved around each other in the master bedroom like dancers who'd practiced the routine for years. She packed toiletries while I printed out Jake's project requirements. I folded her business cards into the outer pocket of her suitcase while she charged her phone and laptop. She'd kiss my forehead and say she'd miss us, promise to bring back something interesting from Denver, and remind me that she'd be back Friday afternoon in time for Emma's piano recital. The routine felt safe, predictable, like a well-rehearsed play where everyone knew their lines. She'd text when she boarded, call when she landed, send photos of bland hotel rooms and boring conference facilities. We'd video chat before the kids' bedtime, and she'd listen to Emma practice piano over the phone connection while Jake showed off his latest Lego creation. Distance felt manageable when it had boundaries and schedules. I went to bed that Tuesday night feeling like a man whose life was organized and intentional. Sarah's suitcase sat by the bedroom door, her boarding pass tucked into the front pocket of her purse. The alarm was set for 5:30 because her flight left at 8 and Phoenix traffic could be unpredictable. I fell asleep to the sound of the dishwasher running and the HVAC cycling on and off, the white noise of a house that knew how to take care of itself. Wednesday morning proceeded according to script. I drove Sarah to the airport while the kids finished breakfast and gathered backpacks. We talked about Jake's upcoming parent-teacher conference and Emma's request for a sleepover that weekend. I kissed her goodbye in the departure drop-off lane, told her to have a safe trip, and watched her disappear into the terminal with her rolling suitcase and confident stride. The next 2 days felt normal. I managed school pickup and dinner preparation, homework supervision and bedtime negotiations. Sarah texted photos of her hotel room, a standard business traveler's view of a desk and a window overlooking a parking lot. She called Wednesday night to hear about Jake's science presentation and Emma's successful spelling test. Thursday evening she video chatted with us while we ate ice cream and complained about our math homework. Friday afternoon she was supposed to land at 4:20, which meant she'd be home by 6 if traffic cooperated. I planned to pick up takeout from the Mexican place the kids loved, open a bottle of wine, and let her tell us about Denver while Emma showed off the song she'd been practicing for her recital. I'd set the table with the good plates, not because Friday dinner was a special occasion, but because having Mom home felt like celebration enough. The headache started around 3 o'clock, the kind that begins behind your right eye and spreads like spilled coffee. I'd been staring at shipment schedules and vendor contracts all day, and the fluorescent lights in my office had been flickering just enough to notice. By the time I got home, my skull felt like it was being squeezed by invisible hands, and the desert sun reflecting off car windshields made me squint like a vampire. I needed ibuprofen, the strong kind that Sarah kept in the master bathroom for her occasional migraines. The kids were at after-school care until 5:30, which gave me an hour to shake the headache before I had to be functional again. I went straight to our bathroom, opened the medicine cabinet, and found nothing stronger than children's Tylenol and expired aspirin. Sarah kept a backup supply in the cabinet under the sink, buried behind boxes of tampons and packages of contact lens solution. I'd seen her retrieve emergency supplies from there before, the kind of domestic archaeology that long-term couples navigate without thinking. I knelt down and started moving boxes, looking for the distinctive red packaging of extra-strength pain relief. That's when I found the phone. It was tucked inside an open box of tampons wrapped in a small towel like someone was trying to keep it safe from moisture. Not hidden exactly, but positioned where it wouldn't be found accidentally. My first thought was that it must be an old phone, something she'd kept as a backup or forgotten to trade in when she upgraded. But when I picked it up, it felt warm, like it had been recently used. The screen was cracked across one corner, but when I pressed the power button, it lit up immediately. Full battery, strong signal, a lock screen that showed 17 unread messages and 4 missed calls. The wallpaper was a generic landscape photo, the kind that comes standard with new devices. No personal photos, no family pictures, nothing that connected it to the woman I'd been married to for 12 years. I stared at the lock screen for a full minute, trying to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. Maybe it was a work phone, something her company provided for travel security. Maybe she'd found it somewhere and was trying to return it to its owner. Maybe it belonged to one of the kids' friends, and she'd forgotten to give it back. My brain offered a dozen reasonable stories while my hands shook like I was holding evidence of a crime. The missed calls were all from the same number, labeled simply as MS. The text preview showed fragments of messages I couldn't read without unlocking the device, but the timestamps told a story that made my headache worse. Messages sent at 11:15 p.m., 6:30 a.m., 1:45 p.m. Times when Sarah would have been at work, on a plane, or sitting at our dinner table helping Emma with homework. I tried her birthday as the passcode, then our anniversary, then the kids' birthdays, our address, every combination of numbers that might mean something to the woman I thought I knew completely. Nothing worked. The phone stayed locked, keeping its secrets behind 6 digits I couldn't guess, but I could see enough. The call log showed dozens of outgoing calls to MAs, some lasting an hour or more, made at times when Sarah had told me she was in client meetings or too tired to talk long. The message preview showed words like "missed you," and "can't wait," and next time fragments that looked like love letters written in shorthand. I sat on the bathroom floor with the phone in my hands and felt 12 years of trust evaporate like water in the desert heat. This wasn't a backup device or a work phone or a good deed gone unfinished. This was a secret, carefully hidden and actively used. This was evidence of a life I'd never seen, conversations I'd never heard, a version of my wife who existed only when I wasn't watching. The ibuprofen sat forgotten on the counter while I tried to process what I was holding. Part of me wanted to put the phone back where I'd found it, pretend I'd never seen it, and continue living in the world where Sarah was exactly who she appeared to be. But that world had already ended the moment I'd powered on a device that wasn't supposed to exist. I thought about the kids, still at after-school care, expecting to come home to normal Friday afternoon chaos. I thought about dinner reservations I'd need to cancel and wine that would stay unopened. I thought about Emma's piano recital, and Jake's upcoming baseball tryouts and all the ordinary moments that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else's family. The phone buzzed in my hands, a new message from M. The preview showed just enough to stop my breathing. Landing early. Meet at usual spot. Sarah's flight wasn't supposed to land until 4:20. It was 3:15. If she was landing early, she should have texted me from her regular phone, should have called to arrange pickup, should have been heading home to us instead of to a usual spot I'd never heard of with a person who signed their messages with a single letter. I screenshot the lock screen, capturing the missed calls and message previews, evidence that I could study later when my hands stopped shaking. Then I powered off the phone, wrapped it back in the towel, and placed it exactly where I'd found it. The tampons box went back in its original position, the cabinet door closed, and the bathroom looked exactly like it had before I'd discovered that my marriage was a part-time job. The headache was gone, replaced by a clarity that felt like standing in a walk-in freezer. I knew I was about to cross a line I'd never uncrossed, about to ask questions that would change everything regardless of the answers. But I also knew I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I'd seen, couldn't unknow what I now knew. I had 45 minutes before I needed to pick up the kids. 45 minutes to decide whether I was going to continue being the trusting husband who believed in the best possible explanation, or become the detective husband who followed evidence wherever it led. I chose detective. The first thing I did was check our joint credit card statements online, looking for charges that didn't match the itineraries Sarah had shared with me: hotel bills, restaurant charges, rental car fees, the digital breadcrumbs that business travelers leave behind. Most of it looked normal, expected, the predictable expenses of someone who spent 8 days a month in different cities for work. But there were discrepancies. A dinner charge at a restaurant in Las Vegas, on a night Sarah had told me she was too tired to leave her hotel room. A rental car upgrade in Denver that lasted 2 days longer than her supposed business trip. A hotel charge in Sedona on a Tuesday, when she'd said she was in Phoenix at back-to-back meetings. I cross-referenced dates with our family calendar, with school events and soccer practices and piano lessons. The pattern that emerged looked like 2 different people living 2 different schedules. The Sarah who lived with us had a clean, predictable calendar that revolved around work and family obligations. The Sarah who owned the secret phone had a shadow calendar that overlapped with ours but operated according to different rules. My hands moved across the keyboard like they belonged to someone else, searching airline websites for flight changes, checking hotel loyalty programs for stays I didn't know about, building a timeline that looked like evidence for a case I didn't want to prosecute. Each new piece of information felt like a physical weight, like someone was adding stones to a backpack I'd have to carry for the rest of my life. The usual spot mentioned in the text message could have been anywhere, but Las Vegas appeared to be Sarah's schedule more than any other city. The Morrison account required monthly check-ins, she'd explained, because construction projects changed rapidly, and vendor relationships needed constant attention. What I'd seen as professional dedication now looked like convenient cover for something else entirely. I opened a new browser tab and searched for the Morrison account, the client that justified so many trips to Nevada. The company existed, had a legitimate website and active construction projects, but when I dug deeper, looking for Sarah's name in project listings and vendor directories, I found nothing. No mention of procurement specialists, no references to ongoing consulting relationships, no paper trail that connected my wife to the client she talked about over dinner. 25 minutes until kid pickup. 25 minutes to decide how far down this rabbit hole I was willing to fall. I could stop now, pretend the secret phone was a misunderstanding, trust that Sarah would explain everything when she got home, or I could keep pulling threads until the whole sweater unraveled in my hands. I kept pulling. Social media had never been Sarah's priority, but she maintained basic profiles for professional networking. LinkedIn showed her employment history, conference presentations, and connections with other procurement specialists. Facebook was family photos and birthday wishes, the public-facing version of our life that looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. But when I searched for combinations of Sarah's name with Las Vegas, Denver and Sedona, I found traces of a different story. A tagged photo from a restaurant in Vegas, taken by someone named Marcus Delacroix. Sarah in a black dress I'd never seen, sitting across from a man I'd never met, both of them smiling like they shared a secret the camera couldn't catch. Marcus Delacroix, the M from the secret phone's contact list suddenly had a face and a full name. I clicked through to his profile, which was mostly private but showed enough to paint a picture. Real estate developer based in Las Vegas, recently divorced, with the kind of confident smile that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. His business page showed luxury developments, high-end commercial projects, and client testimonials that painted him as someone who specialized in making deals happen. The kind of person who might legitimately need procurement consulting, if that's what this was. But the photo of him and Sarah didn't look like a business dinner. It looked like a date. 15 minutes until I had to leave for school pickup. 15 minutes to absorb the fact that my wife had been having dinner with a man she'd never mentioned, in a city she visited regularly, while carrying a phone I'd never seen. 15 minutes to transition from detective mode to dad mode, to figure out how to be normal for Emma and Jake while my world collapsed in real time. I closed all the browser tabs, cleared the search history, and sat in the sudden quiet of our bedroom. The secret phone lay hidden beneath feminine products I'd never touch, keeping its complete secrets while revealing just enough to destroy everything I'd believed about my marriage. The house around me felt different, like someone had moved all the furniture 3 inches to the left while I wasn't looking. The drive to school pickup passed in a haze of automatic responses, turn signals, speed limits, parking lot etiquette, all the mundane mechanics of responsible fatherhood, while my brain processed the fact that I no longer knew who I was married to. Emma bounced into the car with stories about art class and friend drama. Jake climbed into the passenger seat and immediately started explaining a video game he wanted for his birthday. I nodded and asked questions and made the appropriate noises while my mind stayed stuck on a restaurant in Las Vegas, a man named Marcus, and a phone hidden where I was never supposed to find it. The kids chatted about weekend plans and homework assignments, building the normal Friday afternoon atmosphere that felt like an elaborate performance now that I knew I was the only one who didn't have a script. At home I helped with snacks and supervised the start of weekend freedom while checking the clock every few minutes. Sarah's original flight would have landed 20 minutes ago. If she was still following the schedule she'd shared with me, she'd be home within the hour, ready to rejoin our family routine as if the secret phone didn't exist. But the secret phone had buzzed with talk of landing early and meeting at usual spots, which meant Sarah was somewhere in Phoenix, or maybe not in Phoenix at all, living a version of Friday afternoon that didn't include coming home to us. Which meant everything she'd told me about her travel schedule was as fictional as the Morrison account that didn't seem to know she existed. The kids settled into their after-school routines, Emma with her coloring books and Jake with his homework, while I stood in the kitchen and tried to figure out what came next. Do I confront her when she walks through the door? Do I pretend I never found the phone until I can gather more evidence? Do I call a lawyer, a therapist, or a private investigator? Do I tell the children that mommy might not be who they think she is? My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah's regular number. Flight delayed, won't be home until 8. Order pizza for the kids, love you. I stared at the message for a long time trying to reconcile it with the text on the secret phone about landing early. 2 different stories, two different timelines, two different versions of my wife sending contradictory information to different audiences. The woman texting me about flight delays wasn't the same person making plans to meet Marcus at their usual spot. I typed back, "No problem, safe travels." Then I ordered pizza and opened a beer and sat at our kitchen table wondering how many lies I'd believed, how many nights I'd gone to sleep next to a stranger, how many times I'd told the kids that mommy was working hard to take care of our family while she was actually building a different family with someone else. The secret phone was still hidden in our bathroom, waiting to reveal more secrets if I was brave enough to find them. But I already knew enough to understand that my marriage had ended the moment I'd reached for ibuprofen and found evidence instead. The rest was just paperwork. 8 o'clock came and went without Sarah walking through our front door. The pizza boxes sat empty on the counter, the kids had finished their homework, and I'd managed to maintain the illusion of a normal Friday evening while my insides felt like they'd been rearranged by a tornado. Emma practiced piano in the living room, her small fingers picking out a melody that sounded like childhood itself. Jake sprawled on the couch with a book about space exploration, occasionally looking up to ask questions about black holes and distant galaxies. At 8:15, my phone buzzed. Sarah's regular number, missed connection in Denver, stuck until morning, hotel is booking me a room. Sorry honey, kiss the kids for me. I read the message 3 times then walked to our bedroom and retrieved the secret phone from its hiding place. The device was still warm, still active, still full of secrets I was about to uncover. This time I was ready to cross every line I'd drawn for myself. This time I needed to know exactly who I was married to. The passcode attempts I'd made earlier had been emotional guesses, numbers that meant something to the woman I thought I knew, but this phone belonged to a different version of Sarah, one who might use completely different reference points. I tried variations of Marcus Delacroix's name, the Las Vegas area code, dates that might have significance in a relationship I'd never suspected. On the 7th attempt, the phone unlocked. The passcode was the date of our wedding anniversary, but with the digits reversed, the symbolism felt like a slap across the face. She'd taken the most sacred date in our shared history, and turned it backwards, creating a secret key to a secret life that existed in opposition to everything we'd built together. The home screen revealed an organized digital life that looked nothing like Sarah's regular phone, messaging apps I'd never seen her use, travel booking platforms that weren't connected to her work account, and a photo gallery that made my stomach drop into my shoes. The most recent pictures showed Sarah in clothes I'd never seen, in places I'd never been, with a man who looked at her the way I thought only I was allowed to look at her. Marcus Delacroix wasn't just a business contact or a casual acquaintance, he was someone who knew how Sarah liked her coffee, who could make her laugh until she threw her head back and forgot to be careful, who had access to sides of my wife that I'd convinced myself belonged only to our marriage. The photos told a story of familiarity, of inside jokes and shared experiences, of two people who'd built something together while I was home helping with homework and believing in business trips. I opened the messaging thread with Marcus and began scrolling backwards through months of conversations, each exchange revealing another layer of deception that had been carefully constructed around my life. They talked about hotels and restaurants, flight schedules and room preferences, but also about personal things, her frustrations with work, her concerns about the kids, her feelings about our marriage that she'd apparently never shared with me. The messages revealed a pattern that had been running parallel to our family life for almost 8 months. While I'd been proud of Sarah's professional success and increased travel schedule, she'd been building a relationship with someone who lived in Las Vegas, and who seemed to understand her in ways that made me feel like a stranger in my own house. They used pet names I'd never heard, referenced experiences I'd never shared, and planned futures that didn't include the life we'd built in Phoenix. One conversation thread focused on a weekend in Sedona that Sarah had told me was a solo retreat for work stress. The messages showed it had been anything but solo, filled with details about hiking trails and romantic dinners, wine tastings and hotel rooms with views of red rocks that she'd photographed extensively but never shared with me. Marcus had written about how beautiful she looked in the desert light, how peaceful she seemed away from her regular life, how he wished they could have more time like that together. Sarah's responses made it clear that Sedona hadn't been an isolated incident, but part of an ongoing pattern. She wrote about feeling torn between two worlds, about caring for him but being afraid of what discovery would mean for the children and the stability they needed. She never mentioned me by name in these conversations, referring to me only as Robert, or he, or sometimes just the situation at home. The clinical distance of her language when discussing our marriage felt like reading a medical report about my own death. She analyzed our relationship like it was a logistical problem that needed managing rather than a commitment that deserved honoring. She wrote about my good qualities, my reliability and steadiness, but in the same tone someone might use to describe a dependable appliance that worked exactly as expected but never surprised anyone. I found the conversation thread about her most recent trip, the one she was supposedly returning from tonight. Marcus had picked her up from the Phoenix airport on Wednesday morning, and they'd driven to Flagstaff for what she described as 3 perfect days of pretending this is our real life. They'd stayed at a bed and breakfast that specialized in couples retreats, hiked trails that required advance reservations, and visited art galleries that she'd photographed extensively for her personal Instagram account that I'd apparently never been given access to. The messages showed that Sarah had created an entirely separate social media presence for her relationship with Marcus, complete with couple photos and romantic captions that read like love letters to a life I'd never known existed. She'd been documenting their relationship with the same care and attention that she'd once put into family photos, creating a digital scrapbook of experiences that existed in complete opposition to the marriage certificate hanging in our hallway. Wednesday night, while I'd been helping Jake with his science project and putting Emma to bed, Sarah had been sending Marcus photos of herself in lingerie I'd never seen, planning activities for Thursday that had nothing to do with business meetings or client presentations. Thursday evening, while I'd been looking forward to her coming home, she'd been making reservations for Friday night at a restaurant in Scottsdale that was supposed to be their last dinner before she returned to reality. The timeline made it clear that Sarah had never intended to come home Friday evening. The story about flight delays and missed connections was complete fiction, designed to buy her more time with Marcus while maintaining the illusion that she was still the traveling professional I thought I'd married. She was probably in a hotel room with him right now, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate schedules and create cover stories that her trusting husband would never question. I scrolled through older conversations, looking for the beginning of whatever this was, trying to understand how a woman who'd once promised to forsake all others had ended up building a secondary relationship that looked more authentic than our marriage. The earliest messages dated back to February, innocent enough exchanges about construction projects and vendor recommendations that had gradually evolved into personal conversations about stress and loneliness, and the feeling that life was passing by too quickly. Marcus had been patient and strategic, I had to give him that. He'd listened to Sarah's complaints about work pressures and family obligations, offered sympathy for the challenges of balancing career advancement with motherhood, and gradually positioned himself as someone who understood her in ways that her husband apparently didn't. He'd never pushed too hard or moved too fast, just consistently been available when she needed someone to talk to about things she couldn't discuss at home. The transition from professional consulting to personal relationship had been so gradual that I could see how Sarah might have convinced herself it had happened naturally, organically, without anyone making deliberate choices to betray the vows they'd made in front of family and friends. But reading the messages in sequence, I could see the calculated progression, the way Marcus had systematically undermined her commitment to our marriage by offering everything I supposedly wasn't providing. According to their conversations, I was boring, predictable, more focused on practical concerns than romantic gestures. I was a good father and a reliable partner, but I'd stopped seeing Sarah as a woman and started treating her like a co-manager in the business of running a household. Marcus, by contrast, made her feel desired and appreciated, spontaneous and adventurous, like the person she'd been before marriage and children had settled her into routines that felt more like obligations than choices. The worst part was how reasonable her complaints sounded when viewed through the lens of someone who was looking for justification to step outside her marriage. I did focus on practical things like mortgage payments and school districts and retirement planning. I did sometimes treat romantic gestures like items on a to-do list rather than expressions of genuine feeling. I had fallen into the trap of assuming that love was demonstrated through consistency and reliability rather than surprise and passion. But instead of talking to me about feeling unappreciated or overlooked, Sarah had talked to Marcus. Instead of asking me to be more spontaneous or romantic, she'd found someone who specialized in providing exactly those things to married women who felt undervalued at home. Instead of working on our marriage, she'd built a replacement relationship that gave her everything she felt was missing without requiring her to give up the financial security and domestic stability that I provided. The conversations revealed sophisticated planning and careful compartmentalization. Sarah had learned to lie fluently and consistently, creating detailed cover stories that would withstand casual scrutiny while leaving enough flexibility to accommodate the unpredictable scheduling that a secret relationship required. She'd become an expert at managing 2 different phones, 2 different social media accounts, and 2 different versions of herself that never overlapped in ways that might create suspicion. Marcus had helped her develop these skills, offering advice on travel booking strategies that wouldn't show up on our joint credit card statements, hotel loyalty programs that could be managed separately from our shared financial accounts, and communication methods that left minimal digital footprints. He'd essentially taught my wife how to cheat on me more effectively, providing both the emotional justification and the practical tools she needed to maintain a double life. I found conversations about their future plans that made it clear this wasn't a temporary affair or a midlife crisis that would burn itself out naturally. They'd discussed Marcus relocating to Phoenix, Sarah eventually leaving our marriage once the children were older, and building a life together that looked like a corrected version of the mistakes they'd both made in their previous relationships. They talked about traveling together openly, living together without secrecy, and creating the kind of partnership that neither of them felt they'd achieved in their marriages. Reading these plans felt like discovering that someone had been systematically dismantling my house while I slept, carefully removing structural elements and load-bearing walls while maintaining just enough of the facade to keep me from noticing that the building was no longer sound. Sarah hadn't just been unfaithful, she'd been planning her exit strategy while continuing to share my bed and parent my children, and accept my trust as if it were a renewable resource that would never run out. The financial implications became clear as I scrolled through conversations about shared expenses and travel costs. Marcus had been paying for hotels and restaurants, flights and rental cars, effectively subsidizing Sarah's ability to maintain her secret life without creating suspicious charges on our joint accounts. He'd bought her clothes and jewelry, paid for spa treatments and weekend getaways, essentially functioning as a second husband who provided all the romance and luxury, while I covered the mortgage and health insurance. Sarah had accepted these gifts without apparent guilt or hesitation, treating Marcus's financial support as natural compensation for the emotional labor of managing a complicated situation. She'd even complained when he'd been slow to reimburse travel expenses, writing about the stress of having to explain unexpected credit card charges to a husband who monitored every penny and expected complete transparency about spending. The irony was devastating. I'd been proud of our financial partnership, the way we'd built equity and savings and security together through careful budgeting and shared sacrifice. I'd thought we were working toward common goals, building a foundation that would support our family through whatever challenges life might present. Instead, I'd been funding Sarah's ability to audition her replacement while someone else provided all the benefits that made our marriage feel like a constraint rather than a commitment. I found photos that Sarah had sent Marcus from our family vacations, images that I'd thought captured happy memories but that she'd apparently used to demonstrate how bored and trapped she felt in our domestic routines. Beach photos where she looked disconnected despite smiling, theme park pictures where she appeared to be going through the motions of family fun while actually feeling like she was wasting time that could have been spent with someone who truly understood her. Even worse were the photos she'd sent from our bedroom, intimate images that violated not just our marriage but our children's sense of home and safety. She'd turned our private spaces into performance venues for someone else's appreciation, treating our most personal moments as content for a relationship that existed in opposition to everything our house was supposed to represent. The conversations included detailed critiques of our sex life, comparisons between my performance and Marcus's technique, discussions about physical needs that weren't being met, and emotional connections that had been lost somewhere in the routine of marriage and parenthood. Sarah wrote about feeling like she was performing domestic duties rather than expressing genuine affection, going through the motions of physical intimacy while fantasizing about someone who made her feel truly desired. These messages hurt more than the planning and the lying because they suggested that our entire physical relationship had become a charade that Sarah maintained for my benefit while getting her actual needs met elsewhere. Every kiss and touch and moment of supposed intimacy had been contaminated by the knowledge that she was comparing me to someone else and finding me lacking in ways she'd never bothered to communicate directly. The most recent conversations focused on logistics for Sarah's planned return to our family routine, strategies for maintaining normal appearances while processing the emotional intensity of spending 3 days pretending to be Marcus's girlfriend rather than my wife. They discussed how to manage the transition back to domestic life, how to hide the evidence of their time together, and how to maintain emotional connection despite the physical distance that would be necessary until their next opportunity to meet. Marcus had written about how difficult it was to watch Sarah return to a life that he felt was beneath her, to a marriage that he characterized as a practical arrangement rather than a true partnership. He'd encouraged her to start making concrete plans for separation, suggesting divorce attorneys and financial strategies that would protect her interests while minimizing the impact on their relationship. He'd even offered to help fund her legal fees if necessary, treating the dissolution of my marriage as an investment in their shared future. Sarah's responses showed that she was seriously considering his suggestions but remained concerned about the impact on Emma and Jake, the disruption to their school routines and social connections, the financial complications that would result from dividing assets and establishing separate households. She wrote about feeling guilty for prioritizing her own happiness over family stability, but also increasingly resentful of being expected to sacrifice her personal fulfillment for the sake of maintaining appearances. The conversations revealed that our marriage had become a prison in Sarah's mind, a legal and social obligation that prevented her from living authentically with the person she truly loved. Every family dinner and school event, every vacation and holiday celebration had become an elaborate performance that she maintained while counting down the days until she could escape back to her real life with Marcus. I closed the messaging app and opened the photo gallery, scrolling through hundreds of images that documented a relationship I'd never known existed. Sarah looked happier in these photos than she'd looked in our family pictures for years, more relaxed and genuine, like someone who'd finally found the person she was meant to be. The woman in these images was still recognizably my wife, but she was a version of herself that I'd apparently never had access to, someone who laughed differently and smiled with her whole face and looked at Marcus like he hung the moon just for her. The photos showed intimate moments and shared adventures, inside jokes and spontaneous gestures, the kind of romantic spontaneity that Sarah had complained was missing from our marriage. Marcus had clearly made an effort to document their relationship comprehensively, creating a visual record that could be treasured even when they were apart. Every dinner and walk and sunrise had been photographed with the care of someone who understood that these moments were precious and finite. Looking at these images, I could see what Sarah meant when she'd written about feeling truly seen and appreciated. Marcus photographed her like she was beautiful and fascinating, capturing angles and expressions that made her look like the kind of woman who belonged in magazines rather than suburban shopping centers. He'd helped her create a version of herself that felt more authentic than the mother and wife roles she played at home, but these photos also revealed the elaborate deception that had been necessary to maintain their relationship. Images were carefully cropped to avoid identifying landmarks, backgrounds were chosen to prevent easy location identification, and Sarah's face was often partially hidden to protect against accidental discovery. Even their most romantic moments had been constrained by the need for secrecy, turning spontaneous affection into calculated risk management. I found videos that Sarah had recorded specifically for Marcus, intimate messages that she'd sent during business trips that were actually romantic getaways, proof that she'd been performing for his camera while supposedly conducting professional business in cities I'd never visited. These recordings showed a side of my wife that I'd never seen, someone who was comfortable being explicitly sexual in ways that our marriage had apparently never inspired. The video messages revealed ongoing conversations about physical needs and desires, comparisons between their intimate relationship and what Sarah described as the passionless routine of marital obligation. She'd recorded herself in hotel rooms while I was at home putting our children to bed, creating content for someone else's pleasure while I assumed she was too tired from work travel to maintain regular contact with her family. These recordings made it clear that Sarah's frequent travel schedule hadn't just provided opportunities for in-person meetings with Marcus, it had also created regular opportunities for virtual intimacy that kept their relationship active even when they were physically separated. Every business trip had included private time for video calls and personal messages, turning professional obligations into extended foreplay for a relationship that existed entirely outside the boundaries of our marriage. The timestamps on these videos corresponded with nights when Sarah had told me she was too exhausted to talk long, too busy with client dinners to video chat with the children, too focused on early morning meetings to stay up late catching up on our respective days. She'd been rationing her emotional and physical energy, saving her best self for someone else while giving our family whatever was left over after she'd satisfied her primary relationship. I opened the travel booking app and found a complete record of trips that bore no resemblance to the itineraries Sarah had shared with me. While I thought she was traveling for business 8 days per month, she'd actually been traveling for pleasure almost twice that often, using personal time and vacation days to extend business trips into romantic getaways or creating completely fictional business obligations to cover weekends and holidays spent with Marcus. The booking record showed luxury accommodations and first-class flights, spa treatments and fine dining reservations, the kind of travel experiences that our family budget had never been able to afford but that Marcus had apparently been funding as a regular part of their relationship. Sarah had been living like a wealthy woman's mistress while maintaining the illusion of being a middle-class working mother who occasionally traveled for professional development. These bookings revealed the extent to which Sarah's professional obligations had become completely fictional. Most of her supposed business trips had been pure vacation, elaborate cover stories that allowed her to spend uninterrupted time with Marcus while I managed our household and assumed she was working hard to advance her career and increase our family income. The Morrison account in Las Vegas was real, but Sarah's connection to it was apparently minimal, just enough professional contact to provide plausible cover for frequent visits to the city where Marcus lived and worked. The financial records in the app showed that Marcus had been paying for everything, treating Sarah's travel expenses like a personal budget item rather than shared costs that needed to be managed carefully. He'd covered flights and hotels, meals and entertainment, shopping trips and spa treatments, essentially funding a lifestyle that was completely disconnected from the financial realities of our marriage and family obligations. Sarah had accepted this arrangement without apparent concern about the implications, treating Marcus's financial support as natural compensation for the emotional complications of maintaining a secret relationship. She'd never seemed to consider how this dynamic might affect the power balance in their relationship or how it might influence her decision-making about our marriage and family. I found calendar entries that showed detailed planning for their time together, carefully coordinated schedules that maximized their opportunities for uninterrupted romance while minimizing the risk of discovery. They developed sophisticated systems for communication and coordination, backup plans for unexpected schedule changes, and contingency strategies for managing family emergencies that might interfere with their planned rendezvous. The level of organization required to maintain this double life was staggering, requiring constant attention to detail and careful management of multiple conflicting commitments. Sarah had essentially been working a second full-time job that involved managing Marcus's emotional needs, coordinating their travel schedules, and maintaining the elaborate deception that kept their relationship secret from both of their respective families and professional communities. The calendar showed that their relationship had become increasingly demanding over time, requiring more frequent contact and longer periods together, gradually consuming more and more of Sarah's emotional and physical energy. What had started as occasional weekend getaways had evolved into a relationship that required constant maintenance and regular feeding, leaving less and less of herself available for our marriage and family life. I realized that the distance I'd been feeling from Sarah over the past few months hadn't been the natural evolution of a long-term marriage settling into comfortable routine. It had been the inevitable result of her primary emotional investment being redirected towards someone else, leaving our family with whatever attention and affection remained after she'd satisfied her real relationship. The secret phone contained evidence of a completely parallel life that Sarah had been living for 8 months, a relationship that had evolved from professional networking to emotional affair to full-blown alternative marriage. She'd been building a future with Marcus while maintaining the facade of commitment to our family, essentially using our household as base camp while she explored the possibility of a completely different life with someone who made her feel like a different version of herself. Reading through months of messages and looking at hundreds of photos, I understood that our marriage hadn't failed because of communication problems or incompatible life goals. It had been systematically undermined by someone who'd decided that the life we'd built together was inadequate compared to what she could have with someone else, but who'd lacked the courage or honesty to end our relationship before beginning a new one. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, but it was also strangely liberating. I was no longer living in uncertainty about Sarah's feelings or commitment. I no longer had to wonder whether I was imagining problems or being overly suspicious about changes in her behavior. The secret phone had provided complete clarity about exactly where I stood in my wife's priorities, and the answer was devastating but definitive. Sarah was supposed to be home tomorrow morning, returning from a business trip that had never happened, to resume her role as wife and mother in a marriage that she'd already replaced with something she found more satisfying. She would kiss me hello and ask about the children's weekend activities and slip back into our domestic routine as if the past 4 days had been spent in conference rooms and client meetings rather than bed and breakfast with her boyfriend. But this time I would be ready for her performance. This time I would know exactly who I was talking to and what she'd been doing instead of what she'd told me she was doing. This time I would be the one carrying secrets while maintaining facades, holding evidence while pretending ignorance, managing information while appearing to trust completely. I powered off the secret phone and returned it to its hiding place, then walked through our house collecting evidence of the life Sarah was planning to leave behind. Our wedding photos, family vacation pictures, school artwork from the children, mortgage documents and insurance policies and investment statements that represented 12 years of shared financial responsibility. All of it felt like archaeology now, artifacts from a civilization that had already fallen even though the inhabitants hadn't been informed yet. The children were asleep, Emma with her stuffed elephant and Jake with his spacebook, both of them trusting that their world was stable and secure, that their parents were committed to maintaining the family structure that gave their lives meaning and predictability. They had no idea that their mother was auditioning her replacement for their stepfather, that their family was being dissolved by someone who decided she deserved a more exciting life than the one they'd built together. I sat in our kitchen with a beer and a notebook, beginning to plan my response to discoveries that changed everything about our marriage and family future. I had evidence of extensive infidelity and financial deception, grounds for divorce that would protect my interests and my relationship with the children, but I also had 2 kids who loved their mother and deserved to maintain that relationship regardless of what she'd done to our marriage. The secret phone had answered every question I'd had about Sarah's recent behavior and travel schedule, but it had also raised new questions about how to protect the children while holding their mother accountable for choices that had destroyed our family foundation. I needed legal advice and financial planning, therapeutic support and practical strategies for managing the logistics of separation and divorce. But first I needed to get through one more night of pretending that our marriage was real, one more morning of family breakfast and normal routines, one more day of being the husband of a woman who'd already moved on to her next relationship while leaving me to manage the wreckage of the life we'd built together. Tomorrow, Sarah would come home expecting to resume her role as my wife and the mother of our children. She would have no idea that I'd discovered her secret phone and learned about Marcus Delacroix and seen the evidence of 8 months of systematic deception. She would expect me to believe whatever story she'd prepared about her extended business trip, to accept her explanations and trust her commitment to our family. Instead, she would find a husband who finally knew exactly who he was married to, who had seen the evidence of her alternative life and understood that our marriage had been over for months without anyone bothering to inform me. She would discover that keeping secrets requires more than hiding phones, that lies have consequences that extend beyond the people who tell them, and that trust, once broken completely, cannot be repaired. With explanations and apologies, the secret phone had revealed the truth about our marriage. It had also provided the tools I needed to respond to that truth with dignity and strategic thinking, rather than emotional devastation. I was no longer the naive husband who trusted completely and questioned nothing. I was now the informed husband who knew exactly what he was dealing with and could plan accordingly. The house settled around me with the familiar sounds of a family at rest, but everything had changed in ways that would become apparent soon enough. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult conversations, legal consultations and financial planning, the beginning of a process that would reshape our family structure and redefine my role as father and ex-husband. But tonight I had knowledge and evidence, clarity and determination. I had everything I needed to protect my interests and my children's welfare, while holding Sarah accountable for choices that had consequences she apparently hadn't considered carefully enough. The secret phone had ended my marriage, but it had also given me the power to control how that ending would unfold. Saturday morning arrived with the artificial cheerfulness of weekend cartoons and the smell of pancakes I didn't remember making. The kids had woken early, excited about a day that would normally include their mother's return and stories about her latest business trip. Instead, they found me standing at the stove flipping breakfast while trying to figure out how to explain that Mommy would be delayed again without revealing that Mommy had never actually left Arizona. Emma bounced into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and yesterday's t-shirt, full of questions about when Sarah would be home and whether she'd remembered to bring back the snow globe she'd promised from Denver. Jake followed more slowly, already dressed and carrying the spacebook he'd been reading, asking practical questions about pickup times for birthday parties and whether we still planned to visit the Science Museum this afternoon. I fed them answers that felt like lies by omission while my phone buzzed with updates from Sarah's regular number. Delayed again due to weather. Sorry honey, hope to catch a flight this afternoon, miss you all so much. Each message felt like a performance review of her ability to maintain fictional narratives, while I stood in our kitchen knowing exactly where she actually was and who she was actually with. The morning passed in a haze of normal weekend activities that felt like elaborate theater. I helped Emma organize her art supplies while thinking about divorce attorneys. I threw a baseball with Jake in the backyard while calculating child support payments. I loaded the dishwasher while wondering how to divide assets accumulated over 12 years of what I thought was partnership, but now understood had been an increasingly one-sided investment. At 11:30 my phone rang. Sarah's regular number, not the secret phone that was still hidden in our bathroom like a bomb waiting to explode our family's foundation. I let it ring twice before answering with the same tone I'd used for 1,000 previous calls from business trips that I now knew had been romantic getaways. Her voice sounded tired but determined, like someone who'd rehearsed difficult conversations and was ready to deliver lines she'd practiced. The flight situation was complicated, she explained. Weather delays in Denver, missed connections, overbooked alternatives. She might not make it home until Sunday evening, which meant missing Emma's piano recital and Jake's baseball scrimmage. She was devastated about disappointing the children, but sometimes work travel created situations beyond anyone's control. I listened to her performance with the detached appreciation of someone watching a skilled actor deliver familiar dialogue. Every pause was calculated, every detail was designed to deflect questions while providing enough specificity to sound legitimate. She'd learned to lie fluently over 8 months of practice, developing techniques that would have been impressive if they weren't being used to destroy our family. I told her I understood, that travel complications happened, that the kids would be disappointed but they'd rescheduled the Science Museum trip and record Emma's recital for her to watch later. I used the same supportive tone I'd always used when discussing her professional obligations, giving no indication that I knew her professional obligations had become elaborate cover stories for a relationship that had replaced our marriage and her priorities. After hanging up, I sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee that tasted like ashes and made the decision that would define how our family's destruction would unfold. I could confront Sarah when she eventually returned, creating drama and chaos that would traumatize the children and accomplish nothing productive. Or I could take control of the situation, gather the resources I needed, and manage our separation in a way that protected everyone's interests while holding Sarah accountable for choices that had consequences she apparently hadn't considered. I chose control. The first call was to my brother David, an attorney who specialized in family law, and who'd helped friends navigate divorces with dignity and strategic thinking. I explained the situation without emotional editorializing, presenting facts about financial deception and extramarital relationships that provided clear grounds for divorce proceedings. David listened without judgment, asked practical questions about assets and custody preferences, and scheduled a meeting for Monday morning to begin filing paperwork that would protect my interests and establish legal frameworks for our separation. The second call was to our family physician, requesting STD testing that felt humiliating but necessary given Sarah's undisclosed sexual activity with someone whose medical history I knew nothing about. The appointment was scheduled for Monday afternoon, part of a comprehensive health evaluation that would provide documentation for legal proceedings, while ensuring that Sarah's secret relationship hadn't created medical complications that could affect our children. The third call was to a private investigator that David had recommended, someone who specialized in documenting infidelity cases with the kind of professional thoroughness that would survive legal scrutiny. I hired him to follow Sarah during her next supposed business trip, creating an independent record of her activities that would supplement the evidence I'd found on the secret phone. By Saturday afternoon, I'd established a support network and legal strategy that would allow me to respond to Sarah's deception with coordinated action rather than emotional chaos. I'd protected the children from immediate trauma while ensuring that their long-term interests would be represented by professionals who understood how to navigate family dissolution without creating unnecessary damage. The weekend passed in a strange suspension of normal time, like living in a house where everyone knows the foundation is cracked but nobody wants to acknowledge the structural damage. Emma practiced piano with unusual intensity, preparing for a recital her mother would miss because she was too busy playing house with her boyfriend. Jake worked on homework with quiet determination, asking occasionally when mommy would call but accepting my answers without pushing for details that would complicate his understanding of adult relationships. Sunday evening brought Sarah's triumphant return, complete with boarding pass stubs from flights she'd never taken, and luggage that smelled like hotel soap from accommodations I'd never booked. She hugged the children with theatrical enthusiasm, distributed gifts she'd supposedly bought in Denver airport shops, and launched into detailed stories about conference presentations and client meetings that had never happened. I watched her performance with the clinical interest of someone studying a species I'd never encountered before. This woman looked like my wife, sounded like the mother of my children, and moved through our house with the familiar confidence of someone who belonged there. But she was actually a stranger who'd been using our family as a cover story, while building a different life with someone who didn't know our children's names or care about their school schedules. The kids absorbed her attention like plants receiving water after a drought, telling her about weekend activities and showing off artwork and homework that had accumulated during her absence. Sarah listened with apparent genuine interest, asking follow-up questions and making appropriate encouraging noises, performing motherhood with the same skill she demonstrated when lying about flight delays and weather complications. After putting the children to bed, Sarah attempted to reconnect with me, apologizing for the extended absence and suggesting we open wine and catch up on our respective weekends. She'd missed me, she said, touching my arm with practiced affection while describing how lonely business travel could be, how much she appreciated having a stable home and supportive husband to return to after dealing with difficult clients and demanding schedules. I participated in the conversation without revealing anything about my weekend discoveries, asking polite questions about her trip while watching her construct detailed answers about experiences that had never happened. She was good at this, I had to admit. She'd learned to lie with conviction and consistency, creating fictional narratives that included just enough verifiable details to sound authentic while avoiding specifics that could be easily fact-checked. We made love that night with mechanical efficiency, Sarah performing widely duties with the same professional competence she brought to her deception management. I understood now that physical intimacy had become another cover story for her, a way of maintaining domestic appearances while her actual sexual energy was invested in someone who made her feel like the woman she'd apparently never been able to be within our marriage. Monday morning brought school preparations and work routines that felt like elaborate theater, everyone performing their assigned roles while fundamental changes churned beneath surface normalcy. Sarah packed for another business trip, this one supposedly to Portland for vendor meetings that would keep her away until Thursday. I helped with her luggage and wished her safe travels, knowing that the private investigator would be documenting exactly where she actually went and who she actually spent time with. The meeting with David went better than I'd expected, producing a comprehensive legal strategy that would protect my relationship with the children while ensuring equitable division of assets accumulated during 12 years of marriage. The financial picture was complicated by Sarah's secret spending and Marcus's undisclosed contributions, but David felt confident that we could demonstrate financial deception that would influence settlement negotiations. The medical appointment provided clean test results and peace of mind, confirming that Sarah's extramarital activities hadn't created health complications that could affect our family. The private investigator's preliminary report documented Sarah's actual travel patterns and confirmed that her current trip followed the same pattern as previous supposed business obligations, with Marcus meeting her at Phoenix Airport and driving directly to accommodations that had nothing to do with vendor meetings or professional conferences. By Wednesday, I had comprehensive documentation of Sarah's double life, legal representation that would protect my interests, and a clear strategy for managing our separation in a way that minimized trauma for the children while holding their mother accountable for choices that had destroyed our family foundation. I felt ready for conversations that would reshape our domestic arrangements and establish new frameworks for co-parenting relationships. Thursday evening brought Sarah's return from another fictional business trip, complete with stories about Portland clients and vendor negotiations that had supposedly required extending her stay by an extra day. She distributed coffee shop gifts and shared amusing anecdotes about travel complications, performing the role of dedicated professional who occasionally had to sacrifice family time for career advancement. I listened to her performance while thinking about divorce papers that would be filed Monday morning, about custody arrangements that would ensure consistent relationships between the children and both parents, about financial settlements that would provide security for everyone while acknowledging that trust, once completely broken, could never be reconstructed through explanation or apology. Friday morning after the children left for school, I set the secret phone on our kitchen table next to printed copies of text message conversations, travel booking confirmations, and financial records that documented 8 months of systematic deception. Sarah walked into the kitchen expecting normal morning coffee and discovered instead that her carefully constructed double life had been completely exposed. The silence lasted exactly 47 seconds. I know because I was watching the clock, wondering how long it would take for denial to transition into damage control and finally arrive at something resembling truth. Sarah stared at the evidence like someone trying to solve a puzzle in a language she didn't speak, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, fear, and finally a resigned acceptance that suggested she'd always known this moment would eventually arrive. She didn't deny anything or attempt elaborate explanations. Instead, she sat down across from me and asked how long I'd known, as if the duration of my knowledge somehow affected the seriousness of her choices. I told her about finding the phone, about reading the messages, about understanding that our marriage had been replaced by something she found more satisfying but had lacked the courage to end honestly. Sarah tried several approaches to managing the crisis. She apologized for hurting me while explaining that she'd never intended for things to go as far as they had. She described feeling lonely and unappreciated, trapped in domestic routines that made her feel invisible as a woman, even while she was valued as a mother and household manager. She talked about Marcus understanding her in ways that I apparently never had, offering romance and adventure that had been missing from our relationship for years. I listened without arguing or defending myself, letting her explain how our marriage had failed to meet needs that she'd never clearly communicated before seeking satisfaction elsewhere. Some of her complaints were valid, I had to admit. I had become focused on practical concerns rather than romantic gestures, treating our relationship like a business partnership rather than an ongoing courtship that required constant attention and creative energy. But valid complaints didn't justify 8 months of elaborate deception, financial fraud, and systematic lying that had turned our family life into performance art while she built a replacement relationship with someone who offered everything she felt was missing from our marriage. Problems in a relationship create opportunities for communication and change, not justification for secret relationships that undermine the foundation of family stability. Sarah seemed surprised when I told her about the divorce papers that would be filed Monday morning, the custody arrangements that had been negotiated with her interests in mind, the financial settlement that would provide security for her and the children while protecting assets I'd assumed we were building together. She'd apparently expected emotional chaos and relationship negotiation rather than legal consequences and practical planning. The conversation lasted 3 hours and accomplished exactly what I'd hoped it would. Sarah understood that our marriage was ending as a direct result of choices she'd made, that the children would be protected from trauma through careful planning and professional guidance, and that her relationship with Marcus would need to transition from secret affair to open relationship that included responsibility for consequences that affected people beyond themselves. We told the children together that evening, explaining divorce in age-appropriate terms that emphasized continued love and support from both parents while acknowledging that Mommy and Daddy had decided they would be happier living in separate houses. Emma cried and asked questions about custody schedules and holiday arrangements. Jake listened quietly and asked whether the divorce was his fault, requiring extensive reassurance that adult relationships sometimes ended for reasons that had nothing to do with children's behavior. The transition took 6 months of legal proceedings, therapeutic support, and logistical coordination that transformed our family structure while preserving relationships between parents and children. Sarah moved into an apartment near Marcus's house, eventually consolidating their living arrangements into the open relationship they'd been building secretly for 8 months. The children adapted to custody schedules and dual residences with remarkable resilience, maintaining strong connections with both parents while learning that families can take different forms without losing essential love and support. I kept the house and most of the assets, compensation for financial deception and recognition that I'd been the primary investor in domestic stability while Sarah had been building alternative arrangements. The settlement provided security for everyone while establishing clear boundaries that allowed former spouses to co-parent effectively without attempting to reconstruct trust that had been irreparably damaged. 2 years later, our family functions differently but successfully. Emma plays piano for audiences that include both parents, even when we're sitting in different sections of the auditorium. Jake's baseball games feature coordinated cheering from adults who can work together for their children's benefit while maintaining separate personal lives. Holiday celebrations require careful scheduling and diplomatic coordination, but they happen consistently and provide stability that children need for healthy development. Sarah and Marcus married last spring in a ceremony that neither I nor the children attended, formalizing a relationship that had begun with deception but apparently evolved into something sustainable once it operated in daylight rather than shadows. The children visit their new stepfather's house regularly and seem to have adjusted to expanded family arrangements that include additional adults who care about their welfare. I've learned to be a single father who manages household operations independently while maintaining professional responsibilities and social connections. Dating feels like a possibility for the future rather than an immediate priority, giving me time to process relationship lessons and develop clearer understanding of partnership requirements and personal boundaries. The secret phone sits in a box with legal documents and financial records, evidence of how marriages can be systematically undermined by people who lack courage to end relationships honestly before beginning new ones. I don't look at it often, but I keep it as a reminder that trust requires ongoing verification, that people can change in ways that make them unrecognizable to spouses who thought they knew them completely. Our story ended with legal rather than emotional resolution, practical rather than dramatic consequences for choices that affected multiple generations of family relationships. The children learned that adults sometimes make mistakes that require professional help to resolve fairly. I learned that supporting a spouse's career advancement requires careful attention to whether increased opportunities are being used for stated purposes or as cover for activities that undermine family commitments. Most importantly, I learned that marriages end not because people stop loving each other, but because someone decides they love someone else more while lacking honesty to address relationship problems directly. Trust can be rebuilt after betrayal if both parties commit to transparency and change, but trust cannot be reconstructed when betrayal reveals fundamental dishonesty about priorities and commitments that affect children's security and family stability. The secret phone taught me that evidence matters more than explanations, that patterns reveal intentions better than promises, and that protecting children from adult dysfunction requires legal frameworks rather than emotional appeals. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is ensure that divorce proceedings prioritize stability over reconciliation, especially when reconciliation would require ignoring evidence that fundamental trust has been permanently compromised. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.